Welcome to Project Midnight Panic.
Typical single cab truck problem is not enough legroom, with any kind of race seat, and this truck is no exception. With the seat mounted, I could get started on mounting pedals. After stealing the shaft out of the column, and chopping up the steering wheel for the spline hub, I went to work machining the pivot point mount. As with almost every other complete build I've done, I ended up building the entire brake setup, piece by piece. So the pivot point of the pedal needed to be a shaft with the pedal on one side, and an arm to actuate the master cylinder on the other. With the front shock hoops extending into the cabin sitting between the driver's feet, I needed to have the pedal by my left foot, but with the master cylinder on the right side of that tube. The tricky part about the pedal and arm is that they need to be removable, yet locked to the shaft, and do so with enough reliability to operate a brake system. The finished part turned out pretty decent for an old manual Bridgeport. The pocket in the pedal houses the machined-down steering wheel hub, which has a slight press fit. The two original puller bolt holes hold the two together. With the pivot point tacked in place, it looks like everything should work, and since it's splined I can orient the pedal wherever it works best.
Fitting a couple windshield tubes. Support tubes that tie the forward dash bar into the front of the chassis. Started off with making a pocket around the brake pedal to help with ergonomics, while also creating a place to attach some tin work later on. Started working on the bed skin mounts, which will double as the engine cover, most likely with Lexan or aluminum. I came up with a plan that involved poop pipe and undersink parts. After doing some machine work to some threaded pipe parts, they were welded to a section of 1.5 inches DOM. Long story short, when the truck gets wrecked to the point of needing a bed skin, worst case I'll have to replace a couple cheap pieces of tubing and not have to do any major reconstruction on the main tube work. After a pretty long day messing with the engine cover / bedside mount, I decided to head off another direction, and play with the plumbing a bit. The 12-volt rear steer pump is going to be mounted between the seats, and basically under the tower / mount for the shifter. A plate gusset was cut, drilled, and bent to fit in the X tube, which is right under the pump, then welded into place. With the valve mounted I decided to plumb it and the pump together. Before too much stuff got in the way, I figured it would be easier to get some of the steering lines done from the orbital valve to the firewall, where it will pass through with bulkhead fittings.
I finally got some 16 gauge, got the firewall cut, fit, and welded in. I finished flaring the hard lines and installing bulkhead fittings in the firewall. Then the radiator got AN fittings welded on for coolant and the fan mounted. I also whipped up a mount for the electric water pump.
With some makeshift 2-inch blocks under the seat mounts I was getting close to having it comfortable to sit in. I knew I would need a spacer for the master cylinder due to location of the pivot shaft and pedal. I knocked out the front floor section with a couple supports riveted to the bottom. I reached out to Summit Machine Incorporated about some 7075 aluminum links. They were quick with a quote and the pricing was really reasonable. I was looking at where to run some hard lines when I realized I should have omitted one of the big holes in my I-beam. One half is threaded and the fittings actually clamp the plug together around the cross member. Since I was already making a mess on the lathe and mill, a couple weld-on hardline clamps were whipped up as well. Then I started bending tube. Unfortunately I run out of B-nuts and sleeves. I got the connection at the firewall done, but the other end would have to wait until next day's off. I had drawn up a link clamp design, which I took along with a chunk of 3/4 of an inch aluminum plate, to the water jet shop and had some blanks cut. The control cable for my rear steer return to center should lay nicely in the saddle between the two steer lines. The roll pin will be a good spot for a couple zip ties to keep that cable in place. There will be more boxing and gusseting later, but that can all be done during/after final welding on the axles. Making 3 tubes exactly the right length was challenging. With most of the hardline in place I was down to flex joints. I like the reusable fittings and rag hose. That's the end of part 3. See you in part 4.
My name is Jason Arian from Winnetka, Nevada. My rig's Brutus, built by Leroy Latham.
Hit the like, ring that bell, and thanks for all your support on Patreon.